Snow has a sound when it falls at night, a kind of soft whisper that most people probably find peaceful. When you sleep under a bridge or tucked behind a dumpster, that whisper sounds more like a countdown. Every flake that lands on your sleeping bag is another tiny weight pressing down, another degree stolen from your body, another minute closer to the moment when you might not wake up. I turned 34 the same week the first real storm hit Omaha last January. Someone at the soup kitchen handed me a stale cupcake with a crooked candle, and I sat there staring at it for a long time before I could eat it. Not because I was ungrateful, but because birthdays on the street feel like mock celebrations, like throwing a party on a sinking ship. Another year survived, sure, but at what cost and for how much longer? Pete Garrison understood that feeling better than anyone I knew out there. We had met 2 winters prior at a warming center near the old railroad depot, both shivering so violently that our teeth chattered in unison like some broken percussion instrument. Pete was maybe 55 years old, with a gray beard stained yellow around his mouth from decades of cigarettes, and these watery blue eyes that always seemed to be searching for something he had lost and would never find again. He told me once that he had worked as a plumber for 23 years, owned a little house with a paid-off mortgage, had a wife named Ruth who made the best chicken pot pie in all of Nebraska. Then Ruth got pancreatic cancer, and 6 months later, Pete was sitting in an empty house that suddenly felt like a tomb. The grief ate him alive. He stopped showing up to work, stopped paying bills, stopped caring whether he lived or died. By the time he found himself on the streets, he said it almost felt like relief, like he had finally stopped pretending that life without Ruth was worth fighting for. That January had been brutal from the start, but the weather forecast for that particular Wednesday made even the veterans nervous. The temperature was supposed to drop to -15, with wind chills pushing it closer to -30. I remember standing outside the library on Monday afternoon, watching people rush past in their puffy jackets and heated car seats, and thinking about how fragile the line is between their world and mine. One bad month, one medical bill, one layoff, that is all it takes. The shelters were already announcing they would be over capacity, turning people away by lottery like some sick game show where the losers might freeze to death. Pete and I talked about our options that afternoon, sitting on milk crates behind the Vietnamese grocery store, where the owner sometimes let us warm up near the back vent. We decided to stick together, find a spot in the underground parking garage on Farnham Street, where the concrete held some heat from the cars coming and going. But Pete never showed up that night. I waited for him until almost 9, stomping my feet and blowing into my hands, watching my breath crystallize and disappear into the darkness. He had mentioned something about checking the recycling bins near the university. He collected cans and bottles to buy cigarettes, one of the few pleasures he had left. And I figured maybe he had found a better spot, or gotten into one of the church basements that sometimes opened during emergencies. I told myself not to worry, that Pete had survived worse winters than this, that he knew the tricks better than most. So I hunkered down alone in the corner of that parking garage, wrapped myself in every piece of fabric I owned, and tried to sleep while the wind howled outside like something hungry. My dreams were fragmented and strange, full of images of Ruth standing in a kitchen I had never seen, beckoning Pete toward a door filled with white light. I woke up around 4 in the morning, shaking uncontrollably, and I knew right then that something was wrong. The sun came up around 7:30, pale and distant like it was embarrassed to show its face after what the night had done. I started walking toward the university, retracing the route Pete usually took when he went collecting. The streets were quiet in that eerie way they get after a deep freeze. No joggers, no dog walkers, just the occasional car creeping along with frost still clinging to its windows. My boots crunched against the salted sidewalks, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. I checked the usual spots, the alley behind the student union where the recycling bins overflowed on weekends, the loading dock near the science building where warm air sometimes leaked from the ventilation system, the bus stop shelter on Dodge Street, where Pete liked to sit and watch the college kids go by. Nothing. No sign of him anywhere. A janitor coming out of one of the dormitories looked at me with that familiar mixture of pity and disgust. and I wanted to grab him by his clean uniform and ask if he had seen an old man with a yellow beard, but I knew how that would end. I found Pete in the narrow alley between a laundromat and a pawn shop on Leavenworth Street, about 6 blocks from where I had been searching. He was sitting upright against the brick wall, his legs stretched out in front of him, his hands resting on his thighs like he had just decided to take a break and catch his breath. For one horrible second, I thought he was alive. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead at the dumpster across from him, and there was an expression on his face that looked almost peaceful, like he had finally figured out the answer to a question that had been bothering him for years. But then I got closer and saw the frost on his eyelashes, the blue tint around his lips, the way his skin had taken on a waxy texture that no living person ever has. I said his name once, twice, 3 times, each time louder than the last, but my voice just bounced off the walls and disappeared into the frozen air. Pete was gone. He had been gone for hours, probably since sometime before midnight when the temperature had bottomed out and his body had simply surrendered to the cold. I sat down next to him on that frozen concrete, not caring anymore about preserving my own body heat, and I stayed there for what felt like an eternity. His shopping cart was parked a few feet away, still loaded with the plastic bags full of cans and bottles he had collected, maybe $8 worth if he was lucky. That is what his last hours on Earth had been spent doing, digging through trash so he could afford a pack of cigarettes and maybe a cup of coffee from the gas station. I noticed his gloves were missing, probably lost or stolen weeks ago, and his hands were bare and curled slightly inward like claws. The nails had turned a deep purple, almost black. I reached over and touched his shoulder, and it was like touching a statue, completely rigid and utterly foreign to anything resembling human warmth. A sound came out of my mouth that I did not recognize, something between a moan and a scream, and I pressed my forehead against his arm and let the grief tear through me like a winter wind, finding every crack in a broken window. Eventually, a woman walked by the alley entrance, probably on her way to work at one of the shops on the street. She glanced in, did a double take, and then pulled out her phone to call 911. I heard her voice high and panicked, describing what she saw. 2 homeless men, one possibly dead, please send someone quickly. She did not come any closer, did not ask if I was okay, did not offer any comfort at all. She just stood at the mouth of the alley with her phone pressed to her ear, watching us like we were animals at a zoo exhibit that had suddenly become disturbing instead of entertaining. The paramedics arrived about 15 minutes later, followed by a police cruiser with 2 officers who looked bored before they even got out of the car. One of them asked me if I knew the deceased, and I almost laughed at the word. Deceased, like Pete was just a file to be processed, a statistic to be recorded, a problem that had conveniently solved itself by dying in an alley where nobody important would have to see. They zipped Pete into a black body bag and loaded him into a van that did not even have windows in the back. I asked one of the paramedics where they would take him, and she told me the county morgue, where he would stay until they could locate next of kin or, failing that, arrange for a pauper's burial in the municipal cemetery. I thought about Pete's daughter, the one he had mentioned only once in all the time I knew him. She lived somewhere in California, had changed her phone number years ago after one too many desperate calls asking for money. He never blamed her for cutting him off. He said he understood that watching someone you love destroy themselves is its own kind of torture, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away before the drowning man pulls you under with him. But standing there watching that van drive away with his body inside, I wondered if she would ever find out, if some bureaucrat would track her down and deliver the news over the phone like it was an overdue library notice. Your father is dead. He froze to death behind a laundromat. Would you like to claim the body? Here is what people do not understand about dying from exposure. It is not like the movies where someone dramatically collapses in a snowbank. Hypothermia is slow and insidious and almost gentle in its cruelty. Your body starts by pulling blood away from your extremities, sacrificing your fingers and toes to keep your core warm, and you feel this deep, aching cold that settles into your bones like something alive. Then the shivering starts, violent and uncontrollable. your muscles burning through whatever energy you have left trying to generate heat. But eventually the shivering stops, and that is when you know you are in real trouble. Your body has given up the fight, accepted defeat, started shutting down systems one by one like a building going dark floor by floor. The strangest part is that near the end, many people actually feel warm. Their confused brains misinterpret the signals, and they start stripping off their clothes, convinced they are overheating. They call it paradoxical undressing, and it is one of the ways they identify hypothermia victims. Pete still had all his clothes on when I found him, so at least he was spared that final indignity. But I think about those last hours, alone in that alley, and I wonder if he called out for Ruth if he thought she was coming to take him home. The newspapers ran a small story the next day, buried somewhere in the local section between a report on a school board meeting and an advertisement for a furniture sale. Homeless man found dead in downtown alley, the headline read, and they did not even print his name. Just described him as a white male in his 50s, no identification found on his person. Cause of death presumed to be exposure to extreme cold. That was it. That was the sum total of Pete Garrison's obituary, a man who had fixed pipes and paid taxes and loved his wife and lived a whole entire life before the world decided he was disposable. The article mentioned that 3 other homeless individuals had died that same week across the city, bringing the season's total to 11. 11 people, frozen to death in a country that throws away enough food to feed entire nations, in a city with empty office buildings and heated parking garages and churches on every corner preaching about loving your neighbor. I kept that newspaper clipping for months, folded up in my coat pocket, until the paper turned soft and started falling apart along the creases. I wanted to remember the exact number, 11, because someone had to. A year has passed now, and I'm still here, still fighting the same war Pete lost. I found a spot in a transitional housing program last spring, a tiny room with a lock on the door and a radiator that clanks and hisses like an angry cat, but keeps me warm. I think about Pete every single day, especially when the temperature drops and I see the news reports about warming centers opening and donation drives collecting coats. The thing is, coats are not enough. Shelters are not enough. Not when there are more people than beds and the ones who get turned away have to flip a coin with their lives. What Pete needed, what all of us need, is for people to stop looking through us like we are ghosts, to stop treating homelessness like a personal failing instead of a systemic catastrophe. Pete did not die because he was weak or lazy or made bad choices. He died because a society that can afford to send rockets into space could not figure out how to keep a grieving old man from freezing to death 6 blocks from a heated shopping mall. I carry that truth with me now, carved into my chest like a scar that will never fully heal, and I share it with anyone willing to listen. Pete Garrison was my friend. He had a name, a history, a soul, and he deserved so much better than an unmarked grave in a frozen field at the edge of town. My car became my apartment on a rainy Wednesday in September, and I wish I could say it was dramatic or cinematic, but it wasn't. 6 months after graduating from Ohio State with a degree in communications, my apartment lease ended, and I had exactly $400 to my name. My roommate had moved to Seattle with her boyfriend, my temp job at the insurance company had dried up, and my parents, well, let's just say going back to their house in Akron wasn't an option after everything that happened. So, there I was, 24 years old with a journalism degree collecting dust, and my entire life crammed into the back seat of my 2009 Toyota Corolla. I had picked the McDonald's parking lot on Cedar Road in Beechwood because it stayed open late, had decent Wi-Fi that reached the parking lot, and the fluorescent lights made me feel slightly less alone. I told myself it would only be for a few weeks, just until I found something stable. That was 3 weeks ago, and I had developed a whole routine. Park in the same corner spot after 11, use the bathroom before they locked it, sleep with my pepper spray tucked between the driver's seat and the center console. That particular night was a Thursday in early October, and the temperature had dropped to maybe 45 degrees. I remember because I had layered 2 hoodies under my winter coat and still woke up shivering around 2 in the morning. The parking lot was almost empty by then. Just my car, an old pickup truck near the drive-thru that had been there since before I arrived, and a white van parked way on the other end by the dumpsters. I had gotten used to sleeping light, waking up every time headlights swept across my windshield or someone walked too close to my car. But when I opened my eyes that night, something was different. The air inside the car felt wrong somehow, heavy and charged like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I blinked a few times trying to adjust to the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A shape outside my driver's side window, not moving, not walking past, just standing there completely still, maybe 6 inches from the glass. My first instinct was to scream, but nothing came out. It was a man. I could tell that much from the silhouette. Tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. His face was pressed so close to the window that his breath was fogging up the glass in small, rhythmic clouds. I could see the outline of his nose, his forehead, the way his hands were cupped around his eyes like he was trying to peer inside a store window, like he was window shopping. For a few seconds, that felt like hours. I just lay there frozen in my reclined seat, praying that he couldn't see me through the condensation that had built up on the inside of the windows. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just watched those little clouds of breath appear and disappear on the glass, over and over, while my mind raced through every possible scenario of what was about to happen. Then he moved to the back window. I heard his footsteps on the asphalt, slow, deliberate, unhurried, and watched his shadow drift past my peripheral vision until he stopped right behind me. The back seat was stuffed with everything I owned. Clothes in garbage bags, a small cooler, my laptop bag, a pillow and blanket that I used every night. He stood there for what must have been 2 full minutes, just looking at my things, and I realized with a sickening clarity that he knew. He knew someone was living in this car. He had probably been watching me for days, maybe weeks, learning my routine, figuring out when I was most vulnerable. The thought made my chest tighten so hard I thought I might pass out. I could hear him breathing now, or maybe I was imagining it. Every sound was amplified in that silence. The distant hum of the highway, a car door slamming somewhere far away, and underneath it all the soft shuffle of his shoes as he moved again. He came back to the driver's side. This time he didn't just look. I heard the click of the door handle being tested, a gentle pull at first, then harder. The whole car rocked slightly with the force of it. My locks were down. I always triple-checked before sleeping. But the sound of someone trying to get into your space, your only space in the entire world, is something that stays with you. He tried again, yanking now, and I could hear him grunt with the effort. Then his face appeared at the window once more, and this time he was closer, his features slightly visible in the orange glow of the parking lot lights. He looked normal. That was the worst part. Not some wild-eyed maniac, not obviously dangerous. Just a regular guy, maybe in his 40s, with a receding hairline and stubble on his chin. The kind of face you would pass in a grocery store without a second glance. He smiled at the window, and even though I knew he probably couldn't see me clearly, it felt like he was smiling directly at me. I don't know where the courage came from, but something in me snapped. Maybe it was the smile, or maybe it was the realization that if I didn't do something, I would just lie there paralyzed until he found a way in. I grabbed the pepper spray from beside my seat, sat up as fast as I could, and slammed my palm against the horn. The sound exploded through the empty parking lot like a bomb going off. The man stumbled backward, his face twisting from that calm smile into something like shock, and for a split second we just stared at each other through the glass. I kept my hand on the horn, the noise blaring, and with my other hand I held up the pepper spray so he could see it. I was screaming too, I think, though I don't remember what words came out. Probably nothing coherent. Just raw sound, all the fear and anger and helplessness of the past 3 weeks pouring out of me in one primal burst. He ran, Not toward me, thank God, but away, cutting across the parking lot toward the white van by the dumpsters. I watched him go, still leaning on the horn, my whole body trembling so violently that my teeth were chattering. The van's headlights came on, and within seconds, it was peeling out of the lot, tires squealing against the pavement. I caught a glimpse of the license plate, partial, just the first 3 characters BKV, before it disappeared onto Cedar Road, heading east. Only then did I take my hand off the horn. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. My ears were ringing, my throat was raw, and I realized I was crying. Not soft tears, but the ugly kind. The kind where your whole face contorts and snot runs down your lip and you can't catch your breath. I sat there in the driver's seat, pepper spray still clutched in my fist, and I cried until I couldn't anymore. The McDonald's night manager came out about 5 minutes later. Her name was Brianna, a heavy-set black woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and a look on her face that was equal parts concern and annoyance. She had heard the horn from inside and wanted to know what the hell was going on. Tried to explain through my hiccups and shaky breath. The man, the window, the door handle. And I watched her expression shift from irritation to something softer, something like pity. She asked if I was living in my car, and I couldn't lie. Not in that moment. I just nodded. She didn't say anything judgmental, didn't tell me I couldn't park there anymore, didn't give me a lecture about making better choices. She just handed me a cup of hot coffee through my cracked window and told me she was calling the police. I wanted to hug her. I also wanted to disappear into the seat cushions and never be seen again. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, 2 officers in a Beechwood Cruiser. A younger guy with a buzz cut and an older woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. They took my statement in the parking lot while Brianna watched from the doorway, arms crossed against the cold. I told them everything. The man, the hoodie, the way he had pressed his face to the glass, the partial plate number. The younger cop wrote it all down in a little notebook while the older one walked around my car with a flashlight, checking for any signs of tampering. She found smudges on the driver's side window where his face had been, and greasy fingerprints around the door handle. They took photos. The whole time, I could feel them looking at my car differently, seeing the garbage bags of clothes, the pillow in the back seat, the empty fast food wrappers I hadn't had a chance to throw away. I knew what they were thinking. I had seen that look before, from people at gas stations and rest stops, the look that says, "How did you end up like this?" without actually asking the question. The older officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Kimball, asked me how long I had been sleeping in the parking lot. I told her 3 weeks. She asked if I had anywhere else to go, any family or friends who could take me in. I said no, which was mostly true. She didn't push. Instead, she gave me a card for a women's shelter about 15 minutes away and told me that what happened tonight could have ended very differently. She wasn't being cruel about it, just matter of fact. But her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I knew she was right. If my doors hadn't been locked, if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't had the pepper spray within reach, the possibilities unfolded in my mind like a horror movie I couldn't turn off. The younger cop said they would put out an alert for the white van, but his tone suggested he didn't expect much to come of it. Partial plates, dark parking lot, no witnesses besides me. I understood. I wasn't naive enough to think they would catch him. After the police left, Brianna let me come inside to use the bathroom and wash my face. The fluorescent lights in there were brutal, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were swollen and red, my skin pale and blotchy, my hair a tangled mess from sleeping on it wrong. I looked like someone who'd been living in a car for 3 weeks, which I guess made sense. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to pull myself together, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the window, that ordinary face with that terrible smile. Brianna was waiting for me when I came out, holding a bag with 2 cheeseburgers and a large fry. "On the house," she said. I started crying again, which was embarrassing, but she just patted my shoulder and told me to take care of myself. She said she had a daughter about my age, and the thought of her being out there alone in a parking lot made her sick to her stomach. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just thanked her and went back to my car. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I drove to a different parking lot, a Walmart about 10 miles away, and sat there with my doors locked and my pepper spray in my lap until the sun came up. Every van that passed made my heart race. Every person who walked too close to my car sent me into a spiral of panic. When morning finally came, I called the shelter that Sergeant Kimball had mentioned. They had a bed available, and I took it. I stayed there for 6 weeks, long enough to save up for a deposit on a tiny studio apartment in Cleveland Heights, long enough to get a job at a call center that paid barely above minimum wage, but at least paid something. I never went back to that McDonald's. I never saw the man in the white van again, though sometimes I wonder if he found someone else, someone whose doors weren't locked, someone who didn't wake up in time. That thought keeps me up at night more than any memory of his face at my window. I got lucky. I know that now. And I hate that luck is what it takes to survive when you have nothing and nowhere to go. Running away from home felt like freedom for about 3 days. After that, it just felt like being hungry and cold and scared all the time. I was 17, a junior who should have been worrying about SATs and prom dates, but instead I found myself sleeping on a bench in Riverside Park with a bunch of guys who had been living on the streets for years. My parents and I had been fighting constantly since my dad lost his job, and one night after a screaming match about my grades, I just packed a backpack and left. I thought I was making some kind of statement. I thought they would come looking for me, beg me to come back. Nobody came. I had $40 in my pocket when I left, and by the 4th day, I had nothing. Pride is a stupid thing when your stomach is eating itself. The group I fell in with was mostly harmless. There was an older guy everyone called Patches because of his jacket, and a woman named Rita, who talked to herself but always shared her food when she had some. A younger guy, maybe mid-20s, named Scotty, who had bad teeth and a nervous laugh. And then there was Carl. Carl was different from the others. He was quiet, kept to himself, and the other homeless people seemed to avoid him. He was maybe 50, with a gray beard and these watery blue eyes that never seemed to focus on anything. He had a shopping cart full of stuff he guarded like it was gold, and he slept on the far end of our little camp, away from everyone else. The others whispered that Carl had money hidden somewhere, that he was sitting on a small fortune but was too crazy to spend it. I never believed that. But I did notice that Carl always had food, snacks, granola bars, sometimes even sandwiches. And on the 5th night, when I had not eaten anything in almost 2 days, I could not stop staring at his cart. It was around 2 in the morning when I made my decision. Everyone was asleep, or at least pretending to be. The park was dead quiet except for the occasional car passing on the street beyond the trees. I'd been lying on my bench for hours, unable to sleep because my stomach kept cramping up. The hunger was not like anything I had experienced before. It was not just discomfort anymore. It was pain, real pain, like something was clawing at my insides. I watched Carl sleeping near his cart, wrapped in a dirty sleeping bag, and I told myself it was just a candy bar. Just one candy bar. He had plenty. He would not even notice. I got up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I crept over to his cart. My hands found a Snickers bar near the top of one of his plastic bags. I grabbed it and went back to my bench. The whole thing took maybe 15 seconds. I ate that candy bar in 3 bites, barely even tasting it, just shoving it into my mouth like an animal. The next morning started like any other. People waking up slowly, shuffling around, Rita mumbling her usual nonsense while she folded her blankets. I was still hungry, but the edge was off and I felt something close to relief. That relief lasted about 20 minutes. That was when Carl woke up and started going through his cart. I watched him from across the camp, pretending to be busy with my backpack, but I could see everything. He was counting his things, checking his bags, and then he stopped. His whole body went stiff. He checked again, more frantically this time, digging through the plastic bags and pulling things out. Then he stood up and looked around the camp with those watery eyes, and for a second I thought he was looking right at me. My chest got tight. But his gaze moved past me and landed on Scotty, who was sitting on a milk crate about 10 feet away from Carl's cart, closer than anyone else. Scotty had no idea what was happening. He was just sitting there, picking at his fingernails, not paying attention to anything. Carl walked over to Scotty with this slow, deliberate pace that made my stomach turn. He stopped right in front of him and just stood there for a moment, staring down. Scotty looked up with that nervous smile of his, the one that showed his bad teeth, and said something like, "Hey man, what's up?" Carl did not answer. He just asked, real quiet, where his stuff was. Scotty looked confused. He said he did not know what Carl was talking about. Carl asked again, louder this time, and I could hear the edge in his voice. He said someone took food from his cart, and Scotty was sleeping right next to it. Scotty started shaking his head, saying it was not him. He did not take anything. He would never do that. But Carl was not listening. The other people in the camp were starting to pay attention now. Patches stood up from his spot near the fountain, watching. Rita stopped her mumbling. Everyone was looking at Carl and Scotty, and I was just sitting there on my bench, frozen, with the taste of that Snickers bar still in my mouth. I should have said something. That is what I tell myself now, years later. I should have stood up and admitted what I did, but I was 17 and scared and stupid, and I just sat there watching it unfold like it was happening on a television screen. Carl grabbed Scotty by the front of his jacket and yanked him off the milk crate. Scotty was smaller than Carl, skinnier, weaker. He tried to pull away, but Carl had him good. He kept saying it was not him, please, it was not him. But Carl just kept asking where his stuff was, over and over, getting louder each time. Then Carl threw the first punch. It caught Scotty right in the face, and I heard this sound, this wet smacking sound that I can still hear when I close my eyes at night. Scotty went down hard, and Carl got on top of him. The other homeless people just watched. Nobody moved to help. Nobody said anything. I think they were all scared of Carl, or maybe they just did not want to get involved. Either way, they just stood there, and so did I. What happened next is something I have never been able to fully describe to anyone. Carl beat Scotty for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. He punched him in the face, in the ribs, in the stomach. Scotty tried to cover himself, curling up into a ball on the ground, but Carl just kept going. At some point, Scotty stopped making sounds. He stopped trying to protect himself. His arms just fell to his sides and he lay there, and Carl kept hitting him. I remember the sounds more than anything else. The dull thud of fists on flesh. Carl breathing heavy, grunting with each swing. And this horrible gurgling noise coming from Scotty, like he was trying to breathe through liquid. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but my body would not move. It was like my feet were nailed to the ground. I just stood there watching a man get beaten half to death because I stole a candy bar, because I was hungry and selfish and too much of a coward to speak up. Carl finally stopped when he ran out of energy. He was panting, his knuckles bloody, and he just stood over Scotty for a long moment staring down at what he had done. Then he spit on him and walked back to his cart like nothing happened. Scotty was not moving. His face was unrecognizable, swollen and bloody, and there was this dark puddle forming under his head on the concrete. Rita started crying, these quiet little sobs that sounded more like hiccups. Patches pulled out an old flip phone and said he was calling an ambulance. Carl just sat down by his cart and started eating a granola bar, calm as anything, like he had just finished doing some light exercise. Nobody looked at me. Nobody suspected the skinny teenager who had only been there a few days. Why would they? I was just some runaway kid. Scotty was the one who slept closest to Carl's cart. It made sense that it was him. Except, it was not him. It was me. And Scotty was lying on the ground, maybe dying because of me. The ambulance took almost 20 minutes to arrive. 20 minutes of me sitting on that bench, staring at Scotty's body, waiting for him to move or make a sound or do anything that would tell me he was still alive. He did not move. His chest was rising and falling, but barely, and the blood kept spreading under his head. When the paramedics finally showed up, they worked on him for a long time before loading him onto a stretcher. One of them asked what happened, and Patches just said there was a fight, some dispute over stolen property. The paramedic looked around at all of us. These dirty homeless people standing in a city park at 7 in the morning, and I could see the judgment in his eyes. He did not ask any more questions. The cops came a little while later, 2 officers who took statements from Patches and Rita, but did not seem too interested in investigating further. Carl had already disappeared by then, slipped away with his cart while everyone was focused on Scotty. One of the cops asked me if I saw anything, and I said I was asleep when it started. I lied right to his face. He wrote something in his little notebook and walked away, and that was it. Nobody was going to look too hard into a fight between homeless guys in a park. I left the camp about an hour after the cops drove off. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I just grabbed my backpack and started walking, no destination in mind, just needing to move, to get away from that spot where Scotty's blood was still drying on the concrete. I walked for hours through the city, past shops and restaurants and normal people living their normal lives, and I kept thinking about what I had done. Not just the stealing, but the silence, the cowardice. I had watched an innocent man get beaten almost to death, and I had said nothing. I had lied to the police. I was complicit in something terrible, and there was no way to undo it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Scotty's face, the way it looked before and the way it looked after, and I heard that gurgling sound he made when he stopped being able to breathe right. I found a payphone around noon. I do not even know why I stopped there. My feet just carried me to it, and before I knew what I was doing, I was dialing my home number. My mom answered on the second ring. She did not yell at me. That was the thing that broke me. I expected screaming, anger, all the things we had been throwing at each other for months. Instead, her voice cracked and she just said my name over and over, like she could not believe it was really me. She asked where I was, if I was okay, if I was hurt. I could hear my dad in the background asking who was on the phone, and then I heard him make this sound when she told him it was me. This choked, desperate sound that I had never heard him make before. I told them where I was, some intersection downtown that I barely recognized, and my mom said they were coming to get me. Just stay there. Do not move. They were coming. I hung up and sat down on the curb and I started crying. Not quiet crying either, but ugly, loud sobbing that made people on the street stare at me as they walked past. I cried for Scotty, who might have been dead by then for all I knew. I cried for myself, for how stupid and selfish I had been. I cried because my parents still loved me even after everything, and I did not deserve it. My dad's truck pulled up about 40 minutes later, and when he got out and saw me sitting there on that curb, dirty and skinny and broken, he did not say a word. He just walked over and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. I never told them what really happened in that park. I never told anyone until now. I said I had been sleeping rough, that it was hard, that I wanted to come home. All of that was true, just not the whole truth. I went back to school, finished my junior year, graduated the next spring. I went to community college, got a job, built something like a normal life. But I never stopped thinking about Scotty. I looked for news about him for months afterward, searched online for any reports about a homeless man beaten in Riverside Park, but I never found anything. I do not know if he lived or died. I do not know if Carl was ever caught. That uncertainty is its own kind of punishment, I think. Some nights I still dream about it. I am back on that bench, watching Carl walk towards Scotty, and I open my mouth to say it was me. I took it. Leave him alone. But no sound comes out. I just sit there, silent, while it happens all over again. I am 24 now, and I have not stolen anything since that morning. Not a candy bar, not a pen, not anything. It does not make up for what I did. Nothing ever will, but it is the only promise I know how to keep. November can be cruel in Portland, Oregon, and that year it arrived with a vengeance that cut right through whatever layers you managed to pile on. My high school class had graduated back in 2009, and while most of them were building careers and families, I had been sleeping under bridges and in parking garages for the better part of 3 years. A bad divorce, a worse drinking problem, and a series of choices I still regret led me to lose my job as a warehouse supervisor and eventually my apartment. By the time that particular Friday night rolled around, I had learned the rhythm of street survival pretty well. You find your spots, you learn which shelters have beds and which ones are just trouble, and most importantly, you find your people. That night, I was heading toward an abandoned lot off Burnside, where a group of us had been gathering for weeks. It was hidden behind a crumbling brick building that used to be a print shop, shielded from the main road by overgrown bushes and a chain-link fence with a convenient hole near the back corner. When I squeezed through that gap in the fence around 8 in the evening, there were already 5 others huddled around a rusted oil barrel that Jerome had dragged there a month before. Jerome was a Vietnam vet, probably in his late 60s, with a gray beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen too much of everything. He had this way of keeping things calm in the group, a quiet authority that came from experience rather than intimidation. Next to him sat a woman everyone called Birdie, because she was always feeding the pigeons with whatever bread scraps she could find. There was also Tommy, a skinny kid who could not have been older than 22, running from something he never talked about, and the Pratt brothers, Lenny and Gus, who had been homeless together since their mother died and left them with nothing but debt. The fire inside that barrel was the only warm thing for blocks, and we guarded it like it was sacred. That night started out like any other. We passed around a bottle of cheap whiskey that Gus had managed to get from somewhere, and Jerome told one of his stories about his time in Da Nang. Birdie hummed to herself while she sorted through a plastic bag full of things she had collected throughout the day, little treasures that meant nothing to anyone else but everything to her. I had managed to score a pretty decent haul from the dumpster behind a grocery store on Hawthorne. A few bruised apples, half a loaf of bread that was only slightly stale, and 2 cans of beans that were dented but still sealed. I shared what I had because that was how things worked with us. You gave when you could and took when you needed. No questions asked and no debts kept. The fire crackled and popped inside the barrel, sending little sparks up into the black sky, and for a moment it almost felt peaceful. The temperature had dropped to somewhere around 30 degrees, and you could see your breath forming thick clouds every time you exhaled. We all stayed close to that barrel, shoulders nearly touching, drawing whatever warmth we could from the flames and from each other. The trouble walked through that hole in the fence around 10:30, wearing a torn army jacket and carrying a backpack that looked stuffed to bursting. His name was Ray Durkin, and everybody on the streets knew to stay clear of him. He was maybe 45, built like a man who had done time and used every minute of it in the prison yard, with a shaved head covered in poorly done tattoos and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw. Ray had a reputation for violence that was well earned. I had seen him break a man's arm over a sleeping spot near the Willamette River 2 winters ago, and the sound of that bone snapping still visited me in my sleep sometimes. He walked into our circle like he owned the place, dropped his backpack on the ground with a heavy thud, and immediately started warming his hands over our fire without so much as a nod to anyone. Jerome tensed up beside me, and I noticed Tommy slowly inching backward into the shadows. Even Lenny, who was usually quick with a joke or a comment, went completely silent. For a while, nobody said anything. We just sat there in that uncomfortable quiet, the fire crackling between us, Ray standing on the opposite side of the barrel with his eyes scanning each of us like he was sizing up prey. Jerome finally broke the silence by offering Ray a pull from the whiskey bottle, a peace gesture that I had seen him use before to diffuse tense situations. Ray snatched it without a word, took 3 long gulps, and then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He did not offer it back. Instead, he set it down on the ground next to his backpack and started rummaging through his things, pulling out a filthy sleeping bag and a tarp that looked like it had been dragged through mud. Birdie kept her head down, her fingers still moving nervously through her plastic bag, and I could hear her breathing getting faster. I wanted to say something, to tell Ray that there were other spots he could use, but I knew better than to put a target on myself. So I just sat there, my jaw tight, watching him settle in like a storm cloud that had decided to park itself right in the middle of our little haven. The argument started about an hour later, and it came out of nowhere like a punch you do not see coming. Gus had been getting more and more agitated as the night wore on, whispering things to Lenny that I could not quite catch. At some point, Ray must have heard something because his head snapped toward the brothers and his face went hard as concrete. He stood up slowly, and even though the fire was between them, I could feel the heat of his anger radiating stronger than any flame. He pointed a thick finger at Gus and asked him where his jacket was, the army jacket he was wearing. Gus stammered something about finding it, that he had pulled it from a donation bin outside a church on Glisson Street 3 weeks ago. But Ray was not having it. He crossed around the barrel in 4 quick steps and grabbed Gus by the collar of that jacket, lifting him halfway off the ground like he weighed nothing. That jacket was his, Ray said through clenched teeth, stolen from his camp 2 months back when he was doing a stint in county lockup for assault. Whether it was true or not, I could not say, but in that moment, it did not matter. The truth rarely matters when a violent man decides he has been wronged. Lenny jumped up to defend his brother, which was exactly the wrong thing to do. He shoved Ray hard in the chest, trying to break his grip on Gus, and for a second, it actually worked. Ray stumbled back a step, releasing Gus, who fell to the ground, gasping and clutching at his throat. But then Ray's face changed into something I can only describe as empty, like a switch had been flipped, and whatever humanity was behind those eyes just turned off. He came at Lenny with a fury that was terrifying to witness, throwing punches that connected with wet, heavy sounds against flesh and bone. Jerome tried to intervene, grabbing Ray's arm from behind, but Ray spun around and caught him in the temple with an elbow that sent the old man sprawling into the dirt. Birdie was screaming now, this high-pitched wail that seemed to echo off the brick walls surrounding us. I was on my feet, but my legs would not move, stuck somewhere between the instinct to help and the instinct to survive. Tommy had already disappeared through the hole in the fence. Smart kid. The whole scene unfolded in what felt like slow motion, but was probably only 15 or 20 seconds of pure chaos. That was when it happened. Ray had Lenny pinned against the ground, still swinging even though Lenny had stopped fighting back, and Gus came at him from behind with a piece of broken concrete he had grabbed from somewhere. He brought it down hard on Ray's shoulder, not his head, just his shoulder, but it was enough to make Ray howl in pain and roll off his brother. Ray scrambled to his feet, his face twisted with rage, and he lunged toward the oil barrel. I thought he was trying to grab something to use as a weapon, maybe one of the pieces of scrap wood we had been feeding the fire with, but instead, he just shoved the whole thing over in one violent motion, like he wanted to burn the whole world down if he could not win the fight. The barrel tipped with a horrible metallic screech, and the burning wood and embers inside spilled out across the dry weeds and trash that covered the ground of that lot. For a moment, we all just stood there, frozen, watching those little flames catch and spread like living things searching for something to devour. The fire moved faster than I ever thought possible. 1 second it was just a few patches of burning weeds, and the next it was a wall of orange and yellow racing across the lot toward the old print shop building. The dry autumn had turned everything into kindling, the dead grass, the piles of cardboard we used for bedding, the wooden pallets stacked against the fence. All of it went up like it had been soaked in gasoline. The heat hit me in a wave that made me stagger backward, and the smoke came right after, thick and black and choking. I heard Birdie coughing somewhere to my left, and I reached out blindly, grabbed her arm and started pulling her toward the hole in the fence. Jerome was already on his feet, blood running down the side of his face from where Ray had elbowed him, and he was yelling at the Pratt brothers to move, but Lenny was not moving. He was still on the ground where Ray had left him, curled up on his side, and Gus was trying to drag him away from the flames that were creeping closer with every passing second. Ray had vanished, slipped away into the smoke and the night like the coward he was, leaving the rest of us to deal with the nightmare he had created. I got Birdie to the fence and practically shoved her through the hole, screaming at her to run and not look back. Then I turned around and ran back into that hellscape because I could not leave the others behind. The smoke was so thick now that I could barely see 3 feet in front of me, and the heat was unbearable, pressing against my skin like a physical weight. I found Jerome first, stumbling in the wrong direction, disoriented from the blow to his head. I grabbed his arm and pointed him toward the fence, told him to follow the brick wall and he would find the gap. Then I went looking for Gus and Lenny. I found them near the center of the lot, surrounded by flames on 3 sides. Gus had managed to get Lenny sitting up, but Lenny's face was a mess of blood and swelling, and one of his eyes was completely shut. His left arm hung at an angle that made my stomach turn, clearly broken in at least one place. The fire had reached a pile of old tires near the edge of the lot, and the flames shooting up from that were like something out of a horror movie, black smoke billowing up in a column that blocked out the stars above us. I knew we had maybe 30 seconds before our only escape route was cut off. I grabbed Lenny's good arm and threw it over my shoulder while Gus took the other side, and together we half carried, half dragged him toward the fence. Lenny was screaming with every step, this raw animal sound that I still hear sometimes when the night gets too quiet. The fire was roaring now, an actual roar like some giant beast breathing down our necks, and I could feel the hair on my arms singeing from the heat. Sparks were raining down on us like burning snow, landing on our clothes, our skin, leaving little stinging kisses that we did not have time to acknowledge. We reached the fence just as the flames engulfed the spot where we had been standing moments before. I pushed Lenny through the hole first, as gently as I could manage, which was not very gentle at all, and Gus scrambled through after him. I was the last one out, and as I squeezed through that gap in the chain link, I felt the metal hot against my palms, heated by the inferno just feet away. We collapsed on the sidewalk on the other side, all of us gasping and coughing, our lungs full of smoke and our eyes streaming tears. Behind us, the entire lot was ablaze, flames reaching up toward the sky like fingers trying to grab the moon. Someone in one of the nearby buildings must have called the fire department because I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. That sound triggered something primal in all of us. Jerome looked at me with those tired, bloodshot eyes, and just shook his head slowly before limping off into the darkness between buildings. Bertie was already gone, disappeared the moment she had cleared the fence. Gus looked at his brother, looked at me, and I saw the impossible choice playing out across his face. If we stayed, the paramedics would help Lenny, but the police would come too. Warrants, questions, the system that had failed every single one of us in different ways would swallow us whole again. But if we ran, Lenny might not make it through the night with those injuries. I made the decision for him. I told Gus to take his brother and go, that I would stay and flag down the ambulance, give them a fake name, tell them I found Lenny like this on the street. Gus hesitated for just a second, then nodded and started dragging Lenny away from the growing glow of the fire. I sat down on that cold sidewalk and waited for the red and blue lights to arrive, rehearsing my lie, trying to stop my whole body from shaking as the adrenaline drained away and left nothing but exhaustion and a sadness so heavy I could barely breathe. The paramedics found me sitting there about 5 minutes later, covered in soot and smelling like a chimney. I told them exactly what I had planned, that I was walking by and found an injured man on the sidewalk, that I had no idea what happened to him. They did not believe me. I could see it in their eyes, but they also did not care enough to press. They had a patient to stabilize and a fire to stay clear of, and some homeless guy's story was the least of their concerns. The firefighters arrived right after, 3 trucks that lit up the whole block with their flashing lights, and they got to work on the blaze that had now spread to the old print shop. I watched from across the street as they battled it for nearly 2 hours, eventually bringing it under control, but not before the building was gutted completely. A police officer took my statement, wrote down the fake name I gave him, and told me I was free to go. I walked away from that scene with nothing but the burned clothes on my back and lungs that would ache for weeks afterward. I found out later that Lenny survived. Gus got him to a clinic on the east side run by volunteers who did not ask questions, and they patched him up well enough. His arm healed crooked and he lost most of the vision in his left eye, but he lived. That was more than I expected when I saw him lying in that burning lot. I never saw Ray Durkin again after that night, though I heard rumors over the years. Some said he got picked up on a 3rd strike charge and was doing 25 to life somewhere in California. Others said he froze to death under an overpass in Seattle during a cold snap. I like to believe the second one, if I am being truthful, because it feels like some kind of justice, even though I know that is a dark thing to wish on another person. The rest of our little group scattered after the fire. Jerome moved south, said the cold was getting too hard on his bones. Birdie ended up in a women's shelter and last I heard actually got into a transitional housing program. Tommy I never saw again, just vanished like he was never there at all. As for me, that night changed something inside my chest, cracked something open that had been sealed shut for a long time. I checked myself into a detox program 3 weeks later, got clean, got a job washing dishes at a restaurant downtown, and slowly started climbing back towards something resembling a life. I still think about that night whenever November rolls around and the air gets that particular kind of cold. I think about how fast everything can fall apart, how a single act of violence can destroy the fragile peace that people build when they have nothing else. And I think about Jerome passing that whiskey bottle to Ray, trying to keep the peace, not knowing that some fires are already burning long before the first spark ever catches. Sleeping under a bridge in March will make you do things you swore you would never do. I had been homeless in Columbus, Ohio for about 4 months when that night happened, and by then I had already broken most of my own rules just to survive. Before the streets, I worked at a warehouse, had roommates, paid bills on time. Then everything fell apart in a matter of weeks. The warehouse shut down, I got pneumonia, my roommates left, and my landlord started eviction proceedings while I was still coughing up mucus in a free clinic waiting room. My mom died when I was 19, and I never knew my father, so there was no safety net waiting for me. The friends I had from high school were scattered across different states, living their own lives, and I was too ashamed to reach out and admit what had happened to me. Being a woman on the streets teaches you things fast. You learn to trust your gut, to avoid certain areas after dark, to never let anyone know where you sleep. I met him on a Thursday evening outside a coffee shop on High Street. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your teeth ache. I was sitting on the sidewalk, my back against the brick wall, hoping someone might buy me a hot drink or drop some change. He came out of the shop holding 2 cups and offered me one without a word. Medium build, maybe early 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a gray wool coat that looked expensive. His name was Gary, he said, and he volunteered at a shelter downtown sometimes. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, just normal conversation. The weather, how hard the winter had been, how the city should do more for people like me. He had this calm, gentle way of speaking, like a therapist or a pastor. When he offered me $50 and a warm place to sleep for the night, no strings attached, I wanted to say no. Every instinct I had developed on the streets told me to refuse. But I was exhausted, freezing, and he seemed so sincere. I told myself I could handle whatever happened. I was wrong about that in ways I still have nightmares about. His car was a dark blue sedan, clean inside, smelling like pine air freshener. He drove carefully, obeying every speed limit, using his turn signals. We made small talk during the ride and he asked me questions about myself, where I was from, how long I had been on the streets, if I had any family. I kept my answers vague, which he seemed to respect. He told me he lived alone, had been divorced for a few years, worked in insurance claims. Everything about him screamed ordinary. The drive took about 20 minutes, heading into a residential area I did not recognize. Lots of older houses set back from the road with big yards. His place was a 2-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. No neighbors within shouting distance. That detail registered in my mind, but I pushed it aside. He pulled into the garage and the door closed behind us automatically before we even got out of the car. I remember thinking that was a little strange, but I told myself rich people just had different habits. Inside, the house was neat, almost too neat. Everything looked like it belonged in a catalog. Matching furniture, no dust, no clutter, no personal photos on the walls. He gave me a quick tour of the first floor, living room, kitchen, a small bathroom. He pointed toward a hallway and mentioned that the basement was off limits because he used it for storage, and it was a mess. The way he said it, casual but firm, made me glance at the door. It had a heavy deadbolt on it, the kind you would see on an exterior door, not on a basement entrance. I noticed another door near the kitchen with the same type of lock. He caught me looking and smiled. Said he was paranoid about break-ins since his divorce. That explanation made sense on the surface, but something in my chest tightened. I had learned to pay attention to that feeling over the past months. It had kept me safe more than once. But I was inside now, warm for the first time in days, and I convinced myself I was overreacting. He offered me a shower and clean clothes, said his ex-wife had left some things behind that might fit me. The bathroom upstairs was spotless. White tiles, fluffy towels, expensive-looking soap. I locked the door and checked the lock twice before undressing. The hot water felt incredible, and I stayed under the spray longer than I should have, letting the warmth soak into my muscles. When I got out, I noticed there was no window in the bathroom. Just smooth drywall where a window should have been. The clothes he left outside the door were folded neatly. Sweatpants, a long-sleeve shirt, thick socks. They smelled like fabric softener. I put them on and came downstairs to find him in the kitchen, heating up soup on the stove. He had set the table with 2 bowls, 2 spoons, napkins, like we were old friends having dinner together. The soup was chicken noodle from a can, nothing fancy. He sat across from me and watched me eat with this expression I could not quite read. Not hungry, not impatient, just watching. I finished the bowl faster than I meant to, and he immediately offered me more. After dinner, he showed me the guest room where I would be sleeping. It was upstairs at the end of the hallway, with a single bed and a dresser and nothing else. No lamp, no nightstand, no decorations. The window had thick curtains drawn across it, and when I pulled them back slightly, I saw metal bars on the outside of the glass. Security bars, the kind people install in bad neighborhoods to prevent break-ins. But this was not a bad neighborhood, and every other house I had seen on the drive had normal windows. I asked him about it, and he shrugged, said the previous owners must have installed them. He had just never bothered to remove them. His voice was calm, but his eyes stayed fixed on my face a beat too long. I told him I was tired and wanted to sleep. He nodded, wished me good night, and closed the door behind him. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway, then tried the door handle. It turned, the door opened. I exhaled. Maybe I really was just being paranoid. I left the door open a crack and lay down on the bed, still wearing my shoes. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of the door clicking shut. The room was dark, completely dark, and I could not see anything. I reached for my phone out of habit before remembering I had not had a working phone in months. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, then silence. I slid off the bed as quietly as I could and moved toward the door. When I grabbed the handle and turned it, nothing happened. The door was locked from the outside. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried again, twisting the handle harder, pulling, pushing. Nothing. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard breathing on the other side, steady and patient, like someone waiting. I backed away from the door and stumbled into the dresser, knocking something to the floor. The breathing stopped. Then footsteps again, moving away down the hall. I stood there in the darkness, shaking, trying to figure out what to do next. I felt my way along the wall until I found the window. The curtains were heavy and I yanked them aside, letting in a sliver of light from somewhere outside. A street lamp maybe, or the moon. The bars on the window were solid, bolted into the frame from the outside. I pushed against them anyway, knowing it was useless. My eyes adjusted slowly and I started searching the room for anything I could use. The dresser was empty, every drawer bare. The bed had no frame, just a mattress on the floor. No closet, no objects, nothing. It was like a cell designed to look like a bedroom. I went back to the door and examined it more closely. The lock was a simple latch mechanism, the kind that could be opened with a flathead screwdriver or a butter knife. I did not have either, but I did have a zipper on my jacket, a metal one with teeth. I took the jacket off and tried to work the zipper pull into the gap between the door and the frame, aiming for the latch. My fingers were clumsy with fear, but I kept trying, scraping and pushing, for what felt like an hour. The latch finally gave with a small click that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. I froze, waiting for footsteps, waiting for him to come running. Nothing. I eased the door open inch by inch, holding my breath. The hallway was dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from downstairs. maybe a television or a lamp left on. I stepped out of the room and immediately noticed another door across the hall, one I had not seen during the brief tour. It was slightly open, and through the gap I could see a desk covered in monitors, 4 or 5 of them, showing different angles of the house. The guest room, the bathroom, the kitchen, the garage. He had cameras everywhere. On one of the screens I saw myself, a grainy figure standing frozen in the hallway, and I realized he could be watching me right now from anywhere in the house. I forced myself to move, heading toward the stairs, staying close to the wall to avoid any creaky floorboards. Every step felt like a gamble. I made it to the top of the staircase and looked down into the living room below. Empty. The front door was maybe 30 feet away. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard his voice behind me, calm and almost friendly. He said my name, the fake name I had given him earlier, and asked where I was going. I did not turn around. I ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping at the bottom, and sprinted for the front door. My hand hit the deadbolt and I twisted it, yanked the door open, and felt the cold night air on my face for one beautiful second before his hand closed around my arm and pulled me backward. I screamed, loud and raw, knowing there were no neighbors close enough to hear but screaming anyway. He dragged me back into the living room and threw me onto the floor. He was stronger than he looked, much stronger, and his face had changed completely. That gentle, concerned expression was gone. His eyes were flat and empty, like he had switched something off inside himself. He stood over me and told me I should not have done that things could have been easy if I had just cooperated. He reached down to grab me again, and I did the only thing I could think of. I bit his hand as hard as I could, sinking my teeth into the flesh between his thumb and index finger until I tasted blood. He screamed and jerked back, and in that second I rolled sideways and got to my feet. There was a lamp on an end table near the couch, and I grabbed it without thinking, swinging it at his head as he lunged toward me. The base connected with his temple and he staggered, not falling but stumbling enough to give me a few seconds. I ran back toward the front door, but he had locked it again somehow. The deadbolt turned. The kitchen. I remembered the back door near the kitchen. I sprinted through the living room, knocking over a chair behind me to slow him down, and made it to the kitchen. The back door had a chain lock, a deadbolt, and a regular lock. My fingers fumbled with all 3 while I heard him coming, cursing and breathing heavy, his footsteps getting closer. The chain came off, the deadbolt turned, the regular lock clicked. I threw the door open and ran into the backyard, cold, wet grass under my feet, heading for the fence at the edge of the property. The fence was wooden, maybe 6 feet tall, and I hit it at full speed, grabbing the top and pulling myself up. I felt a hand close around my ankle, and I kicked backward as hard as I could, felt my heel connect with something solid. His grip loosened, and I hauled myself over the top, splinters digging into my palms, and dropped down the other side into an empty lot full of dead weeds and broken glass. I did not stop. I ran through the lot, across someone's driveway, down a street I did not recognize, just running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would collapse. I found a gas station about a mile away, the lights bright and welcoming, and I stumbled inside looking like a complete mess, barefoot because I had lost my shoes somewhere, bleeding from my hands, crying and shaking. The woman behind the counter called the police. I told them everything. They went to the house, but Gary was gone. He had cleared out within hours, taken the monitors, taken anything that could identify him. The police said they would investigate, but I could tell from their faces they did not expect to find him. I spent 2 nights in a shelter after that, then got a bus ticket to another city. I never went back to Columbus. Nobody tells you how quiet the world gets after midnight when you sleep outside. My name is irrelevant now, but people used to call me Eddie back when I had a job installing drywall and a studio apartment in Tucson. That life ended somewhere between my second back surgery and the opioid prescription that insurance stopped covering. By the spring of 2024, my 36th birthday had come and gone without celebration, and I had been sleeping behind the recycling center on Conover Road for almost 8 months. I knew every shortcut in the city, every safe corner to rest, every business that would let me use their bathroom without hassle. I also knew which streets to avoid after dark, and that knowledge is what led me into that alley on the night everything changed. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because the shelter on Fifth Avenue served hot soup on Wednesdays, and I had filled my stomach for the first time in 2 days. The Ridley Heights neighborhood had gotten bad over the past year. Drug deals happened openly on the corners, and 3 people had been shot there in the past month alone. I usually walked the long way around, adding 20 minutes to reach my sleeping spot, but that night my legs ached from walking all day looking for aluminum cans to recycle. The alley behind the old textile factory seemed like a reasonable compromise, a straight shot that would keep me off the main streets while cutting through the edge of the dangerous zone. I had used it maybe twice before without incident. The entrance sat between a shuttered pawn shop and a building that used to be a check-cashing place, both covered in graffiti and protected by rusty security gates. A single streetlight flickered at the far end, casting orange shadows that jumped and twitched against the brick walls. I pulled my jacket tighter, adjusted the backpack that held everything I owned, and stepped into the darkness with nothing but the sound of my own footsteps for company. The alley stretched longer than I remembered, maybe 200 yards of cracked asphalt littered with broken bottles and fast food wrappers. Dumpsters lined the left side, overflowing with garbage that nobody had collected in weeks. The smell hit me about 30 feet in, that sour combination of rotting food and stagnant water pooling in potholes that never drained properly. I kept my head down and walked with purpose, the way you learn to move when you live on the streets. You never want to look lost or vulnerable. You never want to seem like an easy target. Halfway through, I passed a shopping cart wedged against a chain-link fence, its wheels stripped and rusted solid. Someone had abandoned it there months ago, and now it served as a landmark of sorts, a sign that I had reached the midpoint. That fence separated the alley from an empty lot where the city had torn down an old warehouse 2 years back. They never built anything new, just left it as a flat expanse of weeds and concrete rubble. I was about 20 feet past the shopping cart when I heard it. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a cat in distress or a dog whimpering somewhere in the lot. The sound was muffled, distant, coming from the other side of the fence. I slowed my pace but kept walking, telling myself it was none of my business. In my world, curiosity gets you killed or beaten or robbed. You learn to keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut. But the sound came again, louder this time, and I recognized it for what it was. A human voice. Someone crying out, the sound cut short like a hand had covered their mouth. I stopped walking. My heart began to pound against my ribs and I felt the sweat break out on my forehead despite the cool night air. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to pretend I heard nothing, to get out of that alley and never look back. But my feet would not obey. I crept toward the fence, staying close to the dumpsters where the shadows were thickest. The chain link had holes in several places, torn open by vandals or maybe by people like me looking for a shortcut. Through one of these gaps, I could see into the lot. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting pale light across the weeds and broken concrete. At first, I saw nothing, just empty space and the skeletal remains of the warehouse foundation. Then movement caught my eye near the far corner, maybe 50 yards from where I stood. 2 figures. No, 3. 1 on the ground. 2 standing over them. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. One of the standing figures drew back his arm and swung something downward. The thud that followed was sickening, a wet, heavy sound that I had never heard before but understood immediately. The figure on the ground jerked and then went still. The other standing figure laughed, a short bark of amusement that echoed across the empty lot and reached my ears with terrible clarity. My body reacted before my mind could process what I had witnessed. I pressed myself flat against the dumpster, making myself as small as possible. Through the gap in the fence, I watched the 2 men step back from the motionless form on the ground. One was tall and heavy-set, wearing a dark hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. The other was shorter, wiry, with a shaved head that gleamed in the moonlight. The tall one held something in his hand, a pipe or a bat. I could not tell which from that distance. He wiped it on his jeans and said something to his companion that I could not hear. The shorter man nodded and pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up his face with a ghostly blue glow. They seemed casual, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. Like what they had just done was nothing more than a minor errand. The person on the ground had not moved since that final blow, and I knew with horrible certainty that I was looking at a body. I wanted to scream. I wanted to charge through that fence and tackle those men and somehow save whoever lay bleeding in the weeds. But I am not a hero. I am a 53-year-old man with a bad back and malnutrition and no weapon except a dull pocket knife I use to open cans. Those two would have killed me without breaking a sweat, and then there would be 2 bodies in that lot instead of 1. So I did the only thing I could do. I made myself breathe slowly, silently, fighting the urge to gasp for air. I counted to 10 in my head, then 20, waiting for them to leave. The tall one lit a cigarette, the flame from his lighter briefly illuminating a face with a crooked nose and a thick beard. He took a long drag and blew smoke toward the sky, completely relaxed. The shorter one finished whatever he was doing on his phone and shoved it back in his pocket. They exchanged a few more words, glanced down at the body one final time, and then began walking toward the opposite end of the lot where a gap in the perimeter fence led out to Dexter Street. I waited until they disappeared into the shadows on the far side. Then I waited another full minute, counting the seconds in my head, terrified that they might come back, or that one of them had spotted me somehow. When I finally moved, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I stumbled backward, away from the fence, my eyes still fixed on the dark shape lying motionless in the lot. Part of me wanted to go to them, to check if they were still alive, to do something. But a larger part understood that every second I stayed was a second wasted. Those men could return at any moment, or someone else might come along, find me near a body, and assume the worst. I knew how this worked. I knew who the cops would believe and who they would arrest. A homeless man covered in dirt, crouching near a murder victim in the middle of the night. I would spend the rest of my life in prison for a crime I did not commit. The only way to help was to find someone with a phone, someone who could call the police and send them to this exact spot before it was too late, if it was not too late already. I ran. Not the careful, measured walk I had learned to use on the streets, but a full desperate sprint toward the end of the alley. My backpack slammed against my spine with every step. My lungs burned from years of cigarettes and sleeping in cold air. I burst out onto Fremont Boulevard and looked wildly in both directions, searching for anyone. A car, a pedestrian, an open business. The street was empty. Shuttered storefronts lined both sides, their windows dark and protected by metal grates. I kept running, my boots pounding against the sidewalk until I spotted the glow of fluorescent lights half a block ahead. A 24-hour laundromat, the kind of place that stays open all night for shift workers and insomniacs. I crashed through the door so hard that the little bell above it nearly ripped from its mount. Inside, a woman in her 60s sat folding towels at one of the plastic tables. She looked up at me with wide eyes, her hands frozen mid-fold, and I realized how I must have appeared. Wild-eyed, sweating, gasping for breath, a homeless man bursting in like a lunatic in the middle of the night. I tried to speak, but the words came out in fragments. Someone hurt. In the lot. Behind the factory. Call the police, please. The woman stared at me for what felt like an eternity, her expression caught somewhere between fear and confusion. I thought she might scream or run or tell me to get out, but something in my face must have convinced her, because she slowly reached into her purse and pulled out a cell phone. Her name was Maxine, I learned later, and she had worked the night shift at a packaging plant for 30 years before retiring. She dialed 911 with steady fingers while I leaned against a washing machine and tried not to collapse. I heard her describe the location, repeat it when the dispatcher asked for clarification, then hand the phone to me. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, asking questions I struggled to answer. How many attackers? What did they look like? Was the victim still breathing? I told them everything I could remember. The tall one with the beard, the short one with the shaved head, the weapon that might have been a pipe or a bat. I told them the men had walked toward Dexter Street. I told them to hurry, please hurry, because someone was dying in that empty lot while we stood here talking. The police arrived at the laundromat 14 minutes after the call. I know because I watched the clock on the wall the entire time, each minute stretching into something unbearable. 2 officers took my statement while Maxine made instant coffee in styrofoam cups and handed them out like we were at some grim midnight gathering. They asked me the same questions the dispatcher had asked, then asked them again in different ways, looking for inconsistencies. I understood. I was a witness without an address, without identification, without anything to prove I was telling the truth. One of the officers drove me back to the lot in his patrol car. More police had already arrived, their red and blue lights painting the surrounding buildings in pulsing color. Yellow tape stretched across the gap in the fence. I watched from the back seat as paramedics emerged from the lot carrying a stretcher. The body on it was covered with a white sheet. Nobody was rushing. Nobody was performing CPR or shouting orders. They moved with the slow, deliberate pace of people who had arrived too late. The officer beside me said something, maybe an attempt at comfort, but I did not hear the words. All I could think about was the sound of that final blow, the wet thud that would echo in my skull for years to come. They found the 2 men 3 days later. Someone had talked, a girlfriend or a neighbor, or maybe just someone who wanted the reward money that the victim's family had posted. The tall one's name was Carl Denning, 41 years old, 3 prior convictions for assault. The shorter one was his cousin, a 26-year-old named Ricky Slade, who had been in and out of county jail since he turned 18. The victim was a 23-year-old college student named James Okonkwo, who had been walking home from his job at a warehouse. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong neighborhood. The detectives told me that my description helped narrow down the suspects, that my willingness to come forward made a difference. But it did not feel like a difference. James Okonkwo was still dead. His mother still had to identify his body. His friends still had to bury him. I did what I could, and it was not enough, and I have carried that weight every single day since. Some nights I still wake up in whatever doorway or shelter bed I have found, gasping for air, hearing that laugh echo across an empty lot. I tell myself I made the right choice. I tell myself that going in there would have just gotten me killed too. But the truth is, I will never know if I could have saved him. I will never know if 30 seconds of courage might have changed everything. And that uncertainty, that permanent maybe, is the thing that haunts me more than anything those 2 men could have done to my body. At that point in my life, I was staying at a women's shelter on the edge of town, trying to keep my days structured so I didn't spiral. Mornings were about lining up early, keeping my clothes clean, and checking the bulletin board for anything that paid cash. That day started the same way, with weak coffee and the smell of disinfectant clinging to everything I owned. I headed out before sunrise toward a day labor pickup spot near an old gas station where contractors sometimes showed up. Most days you waited for hours and went home empty-handed, but hope had a way of making you stand there anyway. I kept telling myself I just needed one small break to get back on my feet. Rent deposits, bus passes, and cheap motels all felt impossibly far away. That morning felt ordinary enough to be forgettable. I didn't realize how carefully I would remember every detail later. While we were waiting, a man parked across the street and watched the line for a while without getting out. He looked clean, well-fed, and out of place compared to the rest of us. After a few minutes, he walked over and said he needed help cleaning a house he was preparing to sell. He spoke calmly, said it would only take a few hours, and promised cash at the end of the day. No paperwork, no questions, just simple cleaning. He looked directly at me when he spoke, like he had already decided. I hesitated, but the others were already shaking their heads or backing away. Something about how quickly he singled me out should have mattered more. Instead, I focused on the idea of money in my pocket by nightfall. I agreed before I gave myself time to talk out of it. The drive didn't take long, but the scenery changed faster than I expected. Houses thinned out, streetlights disappeared, and the road narrowed until it felt forgotten. He didn't talk much, just made small comments about the weather and traffic like we were co-workers. When we pulled up, The house sat alone near a line of trees with no neighboring homes close enough to see us. The place looked empty in a way that felt intentional, not abandoned. No cars, no trash bins, no curtains in the windows. He unlocked the door and gestured for me to go in first. The air inside smelled stale, like dust and old wood, not like a place being actively prepared for sale. I asked where the cleaning supplies were, trying to sound casual. That's when he closed the door behind us and didn't answer. At first, I assumed there was a misunderstanding and tried to keep things light. I said I could leave and come back later if this wasn't a good time. He stepped between me and the door without raising his voice, saying we needed to talk first. The way he blocked the exit felt deliberate, like he had rehearsed the movement. I noticed then how quiet the house was. No hum of appliances, no distant traffic, nothing. My phone had no signal, just a blank bar at the top of the screen. He told me there was no cleaning job and asked questions that had nothing to do with work. Each answer I gave seemed to encourage him to stand closer. I realized then that leaving calmly wasn't an option. Whatever this was, it was already moving in a direction I couldn't afford to follow. I tried to slow everything down by talking, asking questions that didn't matter, pretending this was still a normal conversation. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, like it belonged to someone braver. He started circling the room, explaining how the house used to belong to family, how nobody came out this far anymore. He kept mentioning how people disappeared into routines, and how easy it was for someone to be forgotten. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. I edged toward a hallway, pretending to look for a bathroom, just needing space to think. He noticed immediately and told me not to wander. That was when the fear stopped being abstract and became physical, pressing behind my ribs. I understood that every minute I stayed passive made things worse. The hallway led to empty rooms with bare floors and nothing on the walls, like the house had been stripped on purpose. I noticed the windows were nailed shut from the outside, the wood splintered and uneven. The back door had a metal latch I couldn't open from my side. When I returned to the main room, he was watching me with the patience of someone waiting for a clock to run out. He told me I could sit down, that no one was in a hurry. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, which felt cruel. I asked to use the bathroom again, this time sounding desperate, and he nodded too quickly. As I walked away, I realized he trusted the house more than he needed to watch me. That was the first opening I saw. In the bathroom, the mirror was cracked down the middle, splitting my face into two uneven versions of myself. I locked the door and scanned the room for anything useful. The window was small but not sealed like the others, just painted shut. I grabbed the towel rack and yanked until the screws tore out of the wall. The noise echoed through the house, followed by his footsteps moving fast. I smashed the window with the metal bar, ignoring the sting of glass on my arm. Cold air rushed in, sharp and real. He started shouting, telling me to stop, telling me I was making a mistake. I didn't stop. I climbed halfway out before he reached the door. The drop outside was awkward but survivable, and I hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of me. I didn't look back. My legs moved on instinct, tearing through brush and uneven ground toward the road I remembered. Branches scratched my face and my shoes filled with dirt, but I kept going. When I reached the pavement, a car slowed, the driver staring at me like I was something pulled out of a nightmare. I waved my arms and collapsed onto the shoulder, words tumbling out too fast to make sense. The driver called for help and stayed with me until others arrived. Later, authorities went to the house and found it empty again, like it had already decided to erase itself. I still think about how close I came to being just another person no one noticed missing. The shelter took me back that night without asking many questions, just handed me a blanket and a cup of soup that shook in my hands. I didn't sleep at all. Every time someone walked past my bunk, my body tensed, expecting to see him standing there like he had been waiting. The next morning, a caseworker sat with me in a small office and wrote everything down while I talked. Saying it out loud made it sound unreal, like I was describing a movie I barely remembered watching. She told me I did the right thing, that predators often looked for people who wouldn't be missed right away. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. It wasn't meant to hurt, but it did. A few days later, an officer came by to ask more questions. They showed me photos of houses on the outskirts of town, trying to see if any looked familiar. None of them did. The place I remembered didn't seem to exist anymore, at least not on paper. He explained that sometimes people used empty properties temporarily, moving on before anyone caught on. There wasn't much they could do without an exact location. Hearing that made my chest feel hollow. It meant he was still out there, looking for someone else. The officer suggested I avoid day labor spots for a while and stick close to places with cameras and staff. That advice felt small compared to what had happened, but I took it seriously. I eventually found steady work through a church program, cleaning offices during the evening. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with people around and locked doors that opened from the inside. Every time a man spoke too softly or stood too close, my body reacted before my mind did. I learned how to trust that reaction without letting it control me. I started saving again, slow and careful. I also started talking to other women at the shelter, sharing what happened without details that could scare them away from hope. I told them to listen to the moments that felt wrong even if nothing obvious was happening. Those conversations mattered more than I expected. Posting this now isn't about closure so much as clarity. That day taught me how thin the line is between survival and disappearance, especially when you're already on the margins. I don't know what his plan was or how far it might have gone, and maybe that's for the best. What I do know is that leaving when I did changed everything. I'm in a small apartment now, nothing special, but the door locks and the windows open freely. Some nights I still dream about that house and wake up counting exits. Other nights I sleep through until morning, and that feels like a victory I earned the hard way. At the time, life had narrowed down to whatever fit inside my backpack and whatever kindness the night decided to offer. Sleeping came in fragments, usually on benches or behind closed storefronts, and most days blurred together in a quiet fight to stay clean enough not to draw attention. That evening had been colder than usual, the kind that creeps through thin fabric and settles into your bones. A gas station on the edge of town glowed like a small island of safety, fluorescent lights humming and buzzing insects trapped against the glass. I went in because I needed water and a place to rinse my face. Nothing more ambitious than that. My reflection in the restroom mirror barely looked like someone with a past, just a man with tired eyes and cracked lips. The sink sputtered before giving me lukewarm water, and even that felt like a gift. For a few minutes, the world outside stopped pressing in. The restroom smelled like disinfectant layered over something older and sour, the kind of smell that never fully leaves. I leaned against the wall, letting the quiet wrap around me, counting my breaths until the ache in my feet eased. There was no clock inside, just the faint music from the store speakers bleeding through the walls. At some point, the music stopped, replaced by the sharp clatter of metal somewhere near the front. A heavy thud hit the door, followed by another, louder this time, rattling the handle. Someone yelled something muffled, words lost through steel and echo. I pulled the handle instinctively and felt the resistance immediately. The lock had shifted, solid and final, like a decision already made. Panic didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in, slow and humiliating. I knocked back, trying to keep my voice steady as I called out that someone was inside. The pounding answered me again, quicker, then stopped altogether. Silence settled in so deeply I could hear my own breathing bouncing off the tile. The light stayed on, but the building felt hollow, emptied of people and intent. No phone sat in my pocket, no bottle of water on the sink, nothing that tied me to anyone outside that room. Time stretched in strange ways, minutes swelling into something heavier. Hunger gave way to thirst, and thirst became the only thing I could think about. Every sound from the street felt distant, like it belonged to another version of the world. Hours passed with nothing but the hum of the lights and my own thoughts turning sharp. Sitting on the floor, I realized how invisible I had become, how easy it was for a place to lock up and forget someone like me existed. If something had happened in there, there wouldn't have been a name called out or a number dialed. The door didn't care who leaned against it or how long they stayed quiet. That understanding hit harder than the locked handle or the dry mouth ever could. When the morning finally came and the door opened, the clerk looked startled, then embarrassed, then relieved all at once. I stepped back into daylight, changed in a way that's hard to explain. Since then, I've never stopped thinking about how close disappearing really is, and how no one would have known if I had. The moment the door opened, light flooded in like it had weight, and I had to shield my eyes. The clerk kept apologizing, saying the lock must have caught by mistake, saying they never checked the restroom before closing. I nodded because that was easier than explaining anything. My legs felt weak standing up, pins and needles shooting through my feet as if they didn't belong to me anymore. I asked for water and drank it too fast, spilling some down my chin, not caring how it looked. People stared for a second and then went back to their own routines, coffee cups and lottery tickets, morning already swallowing the night. No one asked how long I'd been in there. No one asked if I was okay. I stepped outside and sat on the curb, letting the cold concrete ground me. Cars came and went, engines starting, doors slamming, the normal rhythm of a day beginning. From the outside, the place looked harmless, just another gas station people forget the moment they pull away. I kept thinking about the lock, how a small turn of metal had erased me from the building without anyone noticing. If I hadn't knocked, if the clerk hadn't opened up when they did, the story could have gone very differently. The thought stayed lodged in my chest, heavy and uncomfortable. I watched the sky lighten and wondered how many times this kind of thing happens without an ending. Later that day, I tried to go about things like normal, but everything felt sharper. Thirst came back quickly, my throat reminding me how fragile the body really is. Every closed door suddenly felt like a risk instead of shelter. I replayed the sounds in my head, the pounding, the sudden quiet, the way the air felt stale after hours with no movement. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was clarity. Being homeless doesn't just mean lacking a place to sleep. It means existing on the edge of other people's attention. The moment that attention slips, you're alone with whatever happens next. That night, I didn't go looking for enclosed spaces. I stayed where I could see the sky, where doors couldn't decide my fate. The experience didn't turn me into a different person overnight, but it stripped something away. I understood how easily I could vanish inside a locked room, a stairwell, a forgotten corner of a building. Since then, I pay attention to exits, to sounds, to the simple fact of being seen. The world didn't change after that day, but I did. And even now, when I pass a gas station late at night, I remember how close I came to becoming a story no one ever told. In the days that followed, the memory kept resurfacing at strange moments. Washing my hands at a public sink made my chest tighten. Hearing a lock click somewhere nearby pulled my attention instantly. I caught myself studying doors, hinges, the way handles sat in their frames, like they were clues to something dangerous. It wasn't paranoia so much as awareness sharpened by experience. People walked past me every day, close enough that I could smell their laundry soap or their coffee, yet none of them knew how close I'd come to being sealed away overnight. I realized how thin the line was between being part of the world and being forgotten inside it. I eventually told another guy on the street about what happened, someone who'd been out there longer than me. He listened quietly, nodding, not surprised at all. He said something that stuck with me, that buildings don't see people, only schedules. Closing time doesn't care who's still inside. That idea haunted me more than the locked door ever did. Systems run smoothly because they aren't built to notice individuals like us. If you fall outside the expected flow, you're just an error that goes unreported. Standing there, I understood that the scariest part wasn't the fear or the thirst, but how normal the situation was. I started making small changes after that. I avoided going anywhere without at least knowing how many exits there were. If I went into a restroom, I paid attention to sounds, footsteps, keys jangling. I asked clerks questions I never would have asked before, just to make sure someone had seen me. It felt awkward, sometimes embarrassing, but staying invisible suddenly felt far worse. I didn't want my existence to depend on whether someone remembered to check a door. Those hours trapped inside that room rewired how I moved through the world. Cautious but alert. Nothing dramatic came out of it in the end. No report, no apology letter, no consequence beyond my own memory. Life went on the same way it always does for people like me, one day bleeding into the next. But I carry that night with me as proof of how close disappearing really is. If I hadn't spoken up, if timing had been slightly different, there wouldn't have been a story to post here at all. I'm sharing this because it happened, because it could happen again, and because some people only exist as long as someone remembers they're there. During the winter I'm talking about, my life had shrunk down to a backpack, a prepaid phone, and whatever space I could claim without being noticed. I wasn't living on the street exactly, not in the way people imagine, but I wasn't stable either. I worked odd hours cleaning offices after they closed, paid in cash, and slept wherever I could stay dry and unseen. That storage facility became my compromise with reality. Renting a small unit felt like a loophole, something almost clever, a place with cameras, fences, and rules that kept most people away at night. I told myself it was temporary, just until I saved enough for a room somewhere. That night started like any other, quiet, routine, almost boring in a way that made me relax more than I should have. The unit I used was narrow and smelled like dust and old cardboard, with a concrete floor that held the cold no matter how many layers I wore. I arranged my things with military precision so nothing scraped or rattled if I shifted my weight. The metal door, when lowered just enough, left a slit of air that felt like breathing through clenched teeth. I always waited until the facility went dark before settling in, listening for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional clank of someone leaving late. That evening, the silence felt heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. I remember thinking it might rain, the way the air pressed against my ears. Sometime after I lay down, the stillness broke in a way that didn't belong. Footsteps echoed down the row, slow and deliberate, not the hurried pace of someone grabbing boxes before closing. Each step had weight to it, the sound bouncing off the metal doors in uneven rhythm. Then came the unmistakable grind of a lock being turned and a unit door lifting nearby. I counted the seconds between movements without meaning to, my mind cataloging every sound like it was evidence. Whoever it was didn't rush, didn't fumble, didn't curse under their breath. That scared me more than anything else could have. Without warning, the overhead light snapped on, flooding the corridor with harsh white glare that seeped through the crack under my door. My heart hammered so hard I was sure it had a sound of its own. Shadows moved across the concrete as someone walked past, stopping occasionally, testing locks one by one. I could hear the faint click of metal and the soft scrape of fingers along door handles. My thoughts split in two directions at once. Stay perfectly still and hope I blended into the building, or take the risk of slipping out while the noise masked me. Every instinct argued with the other, and the space around me felt suddenly too small to breathe. I pressed myself against the back wall, pulling my jacket tighter, trying to control the noise of my breathing without thinking about it too much. The footsteps stopped right outside my unit, close enough that I could see the shadow of shoes through the gap. There was a pause that stretched longer than it should have, followed by the soft rattle of my lock being tested. It didn't open, but the sound of it being touched made my chest ache. Whoever was out there leaned close enough that I caught the faint smell of oil and something sharp, almost medicinal. I realized then how thin the metal door really was, how little separated me from being discovered. The person moved on, checking the next unit, then the next, following a pattern that felt methodical instead of random. I shifted my weight carefully, inch by inch, making sure nothing brushed the floor. Sweat gathered at the base of my neck despite the cold, and my legs tingled from staying too still. Through the crack, I could see flashes of movement as the figure passed under each light. The way they stopped, listened, and then continued told me this wasn't casual. This was someone making sure everything was exactly how they expected it to be. A low voice carried down the row, not loud enough to make out words, but close enough to know someone else might be on the phone or using a radio. That changed everything. One person was terrifying, but the idea of more than one made the air feel heavier. I thought about the exit at the far end, about how far it was, about how loud the gravel sounded under shoes. Staying hidden meant trusting that my presence hadn't already been noticed. Leaving meant stepping into the open under full light, gambling that speed would beat attention. When the footsteps moved farther away, I slowly lifted the door another inch, just enough to see the corridor clearly. The lights hummed overhead, and at the far end, a figure stood near the office, clipboard in hand, checking something against a list. Another person emerged from between units, nodding as they passed each other. That was the moment I decided. I waited until both of them turned away, then slipped out, keeping low, closing the door as softly as possible. Every step toward the exit felt like it echoed, but no one called out. I didn't stop moving until I was beyond the fence, lungs burning, hands numb, carrying everything I owned on my back. I didn't go far at first, just enough to put distance between me and that building. I sat behind a row of dumpsters across the road, knees pulled in, watching the facility from the shadows. The light stayed on longer than usual, and I saw one of them walk the perimeter fence with a flashlight, sweeping the beam along the ground and the gate. It hit the spot where I'd slipped through not long before, paused there, then moved on. That pause told me everything I needed to know. If I had stayed inside, if I'd hesitated even a little longer, I don't think I would have walked out on my own. I waited until the lights finally shut off again before moving. My hands were stiff, and my shoulders ached from tension more than from the cold. I took a longer route away from the area, sticking to side streets, listening for engines slowing down or footsteps changing pace behind me. Every sound felt amplified, like my body was still trapped in that narrow unit. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just kept walking, stopping only when my legs threatened to give out, replaying the sequence of sounds in my head over and over. The next day, I went back during regular hours, trying to look like a normal customer with a reason to be there. I packed my things fast, avoiding eye contact, half expecting someone to stop me or ask questions. No one did. The office clerk barely glanced up. That normalcy was unsettling in its own way. I dropped the key in the slot, walked out, and didn't look back. I didn't argue with myself about it or tell myself I was overreacting. I knew better after what I'd heard and seen. I never slept in another storage unit again. I found a different arrangement not long after, one that didn't rely on being invisible. Even now, when I hear metal doors rolling up or locks clicking into place, my body reacts before my mind does. I don't know who those people were or what would have happened if I'd stayed hidden until they reached my door. What I do know is that trusting that place to keep me safe almost cost me the only thing I had left, the ability to walk away,